Hey, we are discussing the lateral wall of nasal cavity. In this video, we are mainly discussing about the previously asked questions of the Kuhas University. So we have a brief introduction, features concentrating more on the meatus opening, formation, blood supply, nerve supply, and applied anatomy. For introduction, we can say that the lateral wall of nose forms the lateral boundary of the nasal cavity, and it is very irregular in nature, and that is due to the presence of concha, and they are mainly for increasing the surface area for conditioning of the air that we inspire. Features. So first we'll start with the nasal concha. They are basically shelf-like projections directed downwards and medially, and three of them, that is superior, middle, and inferior concha respectively. And next what we want to discuss is the meatus, that is three of them, superior, middle, and inferior meatus, marked as A, B, and C. We'll discuss in detail about them later. Next is the sphenoethmoidal recess, that is a triangular fossa above the superior concha, and there is the opening towards the sphenoidal air sinus. And next what we have is the vestibule, that is the depression in the anterior and lower part of the lateral wall of nose, and mainly covered by skin. Next, above this vestibule is what we have the atrium, and it is a depression in front of the middle meatus, and it is limited above by the agar nasi. Okay, so just a brief diagram of the lateral wall of nose. First, we have the roof of the anterior cranial fossa, and next what we have is the nasal septum. So this two lines represent the nasal septum. And now what we have is the superior concha. So this depression is the superior concha, and then we have the middle concha, and then is the ethmoidal bullae and the maxillary sinus, and now we have the inferior concha, and this next is the just the floor of the nasal cavity. And similarly on the opposite side, now we have the orbit, one on each side. Yeah, so that's it. And now what we have is the palate, which forms the floor of the nasal cavity. Now the meatus openings, we are using this diagram where this is the frontal bone with the frontal air sinus, that is the ethmoidal bone with the ethmoidal air sinus, and that is the palate. Okay, first we have to draw the three conchas, that is this is the superior concha, and this is the middle concha, and this is the inferior concha. The space between the superior and the middle concha is called as the superior meatus, and the space between middle concha and the inferior concha is the middle meatus, and between the inferior concha and the palate is called as the inferior meatus. Okay, in the meatus, inferior meatus, we have the opening of the nasolacrimal duct, and in the middle meatus we have a rounded elevation called as the ethmoidal bulla, which is present below the middle concha, and below the ethmoidal bulla we have a semicircular sulcus, which is called as the hiatus semilunaris. In the anterior part of hiatus semilunaris there is an infundibulum, which has the opening of the frontal air sinus, and on the posterior part we have the opening of maxillary air sinus, and we also have the opening of the anterior ethmoidal air sinus. In the ethmoidal bulla, we have the opening of the middle ethmoidal air sinus, and superior meatus we have only the opening of the posterior ethmoidal air sinus. Above the superior concha there is a triangular space called as the sphenoethmoidal recess. Formation. Basically it has three parts, that is the bony part, cartilaginous part, and the cutaneous part. Bones are, well, the nasal bone, frontal process of maxilla, lacrimal bone, and labyrinth of ethmoid, which has the superior and the middle concha, and then inferior nasal concha, perpendicular plate of palatine bone, medial pterygoid plate. Yeah, and then the cartilaginous part contains superior nasal cartilage, inferior nasal cartilage, and 3 or 4 small cartilages of vela. Well, cutaneous part mainly this contains fibrofatty tissue with which is covered by skin. Okay, now with the diagram we have the frontal bone, sphenoidal bone, and the palate, and that is just the alveolar process of the maxilla. So with the diagram we have the first bony part, that is the nasal bone, and from that we have the frontal process of the maxilla. So it extends from the maxilla to the frontal region, so it is a frontal process of the maxilla. And next we have the lacrimal bone, and after that we have the labyrinth of the ethmoid bone, which has the superior concha and the middle concha, and after that we have the inferior concha. Now we have the perpendicular plates of the parietal bone, and so that is the perpendicular plate of the parietal bone, and next is the median pterygoid plate. So that's the superior concha, middle concha, and inferior concha. Next, the cartilages. We have the superior cartilage, and below it we have the inferior cartilage, and three or four small alar cartilage. And next is the cutaneous part. Blood supply. First, we'll start with the arterial supply. For that, we divide the lateral wall into four. That is anterosuperior, anteroinferior, posterior-inferior, posterior-superior. So, in the first quadrant, we have the anterior ethmoidal and posterior ethmoidal and facial artery branches. And in the second quadrant, we have facial arteries branches. And also, we have the greater palatine artery. Also, in the third quadrant, it is the greater palatine artery. In the fourth quadrant, we have is the sphenopalatine. So, it extends from the sphenoid to the palatal region. So, sphenopalatine. So the mnemonic is E, F, G, and S. E is ethmoidal, F is facial, G is greater palatine, and S is sphenopalatine. Okay, this is the complete diagram, and for more detailed explanation, we can say that the posterior ethmoidal and the anterior ethmoidal are branches of the ophthalmic artery, which is in turn the branch of the internal carotid artery, and the facial artery is a branch of external carotid artery, and which also has its branch as the maxillary artery, which branches into sphenopalatine and greater palatine artery. The venous drainage are mainly by these three, that is the pharyngeal plexus, pterygoid plexus, and the facial vein. Nerve supply also we have divided into four quadrants, and we have general as well as special sensory nerve supply. General we can remember it as three anteriors and one posterior. So the first anterior will be the anterior ethmoidal, just like our arterial supply, anterior ethmoidal. Okay, and the second one, as it is above the alveolus, we can remember it as anterior superior alveolus. The third one, as it is next to the palate, it is anterior palatine. And the last one is in the posterior quadrant of the lateral wall, so we can call it lateral superior posterior nasal branch. Okay, next is the special sensory nerve or the olfactory nerve, that is the olfactory nerve. Now that's a complete diagram. For a little bit explanation of the general sensory nerve, we can say that the anterior ethmoidal is a branch of the ophthalmic nerve, and the anterosuperior alveolar nerve is a branch of the infraorbital nerve, and the last two are the branches of the pterygopalatine ganglia. Now with the clinical application. The hypertrophy of mucosa over the inferior nasal concha may cause allergic rhinitis, which may show as sneezing, excessive watery discharge, or nasal blockage.